All right, joining me now here on the Matthew Filipowicz Show is Betsy Leondar-Wright. Betsy is the program director of the group Class Action, which you can find at classism.org. She is the author of several books. Her latest is Missing Class, Strengthening Social Movement Groups by Seeing Class Cultures, which you can also find at classism.org. Betsy, thank you so much for being on the show.
It's my pleasure, Matt.
All right, so Betsy, you actually begin your new book by describing a meeting that took place with a labor coalition group called the Tri-City Alliance. It actually sets up the whole point of your book quite real here. So let's just begin by telling us about the meeting and how and why these activists were unable to connect.
Right. So the Tri-City Labor Alliance was going to have an annual goal-setting meeting, and they invited in an outside facilitator to run it. It was a college-educated white woman from a professional middle-class background, and she set up the purpose of the big annual meeting, with this very abstract statement of using words like objectives and, let's review the process, and have different categories of goals and strategic planning. A whole paragraph went by with no concrete reference of people, places, or things. She sent people into small groups with instructions about, rank the objectives in terms of the benchmarks for the strategies. And basically, almost everybody non-cooperated with the suggested process in small groups. There was only one small group that did what she asked, and it was a teachers' union small group, not coincidentally. The others all talked about whatever they talked about. They talked politics, and when they reported back, none of them used any of her terms. Instead, they spoke in a much more concrete way with issues like health policies that blocked health access, about a mall developer that was using non-union labor, and they an example of a concrete suggestion is that someone made was, let's see if anyone has a firefighters retirees list that we could call and ask to come out to the picket line of the mall developer. So at the end of the meeting, the outside facilitator Zoe and the two top leaders of the coalition, who were also had advanced degrees and came from professional middle-class backgrounds, they expressed disappointment that they didn't really get the strategic guidance from the membership that they wanted. They felt like it was really, the input they got was unclear. So this is a perfect example of what I'm talking about, because it wasn't that the union members, the industrial and service workers unions members who were there, disliked Zoe. In fact, the ones I interviewed really liked her and were pleased that she came. And it wasn't that they didn't understand the vocabulary of what's a benchmark. They had two different ways of talking about activism. They had two different speech codes, and they were talking at cross purposes that excuse me, that reduced their effectiveness. They were a mixed class coalition, but working class background majority. And by not sort of translating between these two different speech codes, their process of setting goals for the year was impeded. So that's my main point, is that when we don't know and don't blend the class culture traits that are different, our work for social justice doesn't go as well.
Yeah, it's unbelievably interesting, because let's begin, because you actually did a lot of research with different social change groups. Describe the research you actually did to come across to your conclusions here. How many groups did you talk to? Where did you talk to them? Describe the actual process of coming up with the book.
Okay, yeah, I realized at a certain point I was in a lot of dialogue with other activists about Are there class culture traits? And I was realizing that it was actually a hot topic among progressive activists. And I, because I had written about it before, but in a more informal way, and I realized that the only way you could actually answer that question of are there activist class culture differences and what specifically are they would be to do a big social science study. So it took me about 5 years, and I and two other researchers observed the meetings of 25 groups in 5 states, and we tried to make them as varied as possible. So there's anarchist groups and community organizing groups and labor-based coalitions, as I was saying, and anti-war and environmental groups, really different movement traditions, but all left of center, and with really, really compatible goals. And so that's what I wanted to see is can the differences in the way we do things be explained by our different movement traditions, by our racial differences? I tried to get all different varieties of racial combinations, by age and generation. Has activism changed with young people by part of the country? So I tried to get enough variation that I could see whether things truly were class differences. And in so many cases, I found out that they were. That, in fact, the way of talking, the senses of humor, the tastes, the group process preferences, the way of approaching conflict, it correlated with class much more than with gender, race, age, region, and it also varied a lot by movement tradition, but movement traditions all have distinct class roots in their histories. Like the labor movement is very influenced by class cultures from the 30s, 40s, 50s. So those turned out to be the strongest predictors of how activists would approach certain group problems was class and movement tradition.